I spent 32 hours researching regenerative nutrition management to produce 8 hours worth of YouTube videos, and in this video we're going to compress all of that into 14 minutes. So to start off with, all minerals are important, all of the essential ones and some of the non-essential nutrients. So if we look at all the nutrients, if we're missing in any particular nutrient, we're going to be missing out on yields. Now yes, some nutrients have a bigger impact on yield, but regardless, a deficiency in any of them at any particular stage in the crop life will result in a reduction in yield. And so the whole principle of regenerative nutrition management is making sure our crops have access to all those nutrients at the right time in their crop cycle, so that we don't lose yield, because ultimately yield is not made but simply lost. So that means when we're looking at our regenerative nutrition management, we're looking past NPK and looking at everything and how to manage all those collectively. So to start off with the soil doesn't contain all minerals. Now, a lot of people in the regen space, if they reckon that if you have enough soil biology, then that will supply all your crops with all its nutritional requirements. That is not the case. When we look at the total nutritional value of our soils using a total extract, now it's technically a pseudo total because it doesn't consider the really hard stuff to extract, but this gives you a pretty good idea of the total capacity of your soil. So when we're looking at our soil test, when we're looking at the totals, and that's the first thing about regenerative nutrition management, is we need to make sure we actually know what the total capacity of our soil is. So we need to go into our geology, we need to have a look at how did our soils form, what did it form from. So this soil, for example, has plenty of phosphorus, yet it's deficient in available phosphorus. It's deficient in potassium. Now, there's no potassium in the actual soil itself, like in the totals it's deficient. So this here is sitting at about 161 parts per million. The ideal or lower limit for what I like to see on a totals is about 200. So what this tells me is that the soil material itself, the soil parent material, doesn't contain potassium or enough potassium, and that could be a limiting factor. And so the second component of this summary is that we need to consider the total component of our soil. This doesn't necessarily tell us what the plant can pick up, but it does tell us what is available to biology to then unlock so the plant can pick it up. These are really the things that we need to be making capital allocations towards. So in this soil test specifically, there's only two minerals that are really truly deficient. It's potassium as well as selenium. We don't really need to be making capital allocations to anything else, just those two things, because it's not in the parent material. So we need to go through all of our minerals and have a look what is deficient in the parent material, because that is truly what needs to be supplied, because biology can't supply it. Number two is that we need to make those total nutrients available. This process is largely done either by weathering, so physical and chemical weathering of that parent material, or through microbial activity. And so the only thing that we can really stimulate is the microbial activity with the practices we use. And so the general idea is that we have our total nutrients, and what we don't have in our total we need to supply. We then need our microbes to unlock that total supply into the available and to feed our plants. And so the plant can take from both the whatever's in the soil solution or the exchange sites, as well as from the microbial pool in time. So through things like the rhizophagy cycle and the cycling of different microbes through predation or just natural cycling, the plant can get access to those nutrients within the microbes. Likewise, colonization of microbes or fungi can allow for the plant to extract more nutrients from the soil. So to get the total nutrients from our soil, we need to stimulate biology. We need two things. We need the microbial activity itself, so how active these microbes are, as well as the diversity of these microbes. So we want to see lots of different species, and we want to see all of them very active. The best way to do this by far, and it's so much better than adding compost or biochar or soil primer where we're adding some molasses to the soil, is through root exudates. When you think about the carbon you pump into the soil compared to, say, again, composts or a soil primer, you cannot compete with a plant's ability to put carbon out into the soil. And so when we look at a crop that is 10 tons of biomass, it's estimated that about the same amount of biomass above ground has been pumped into the soil as root exudates. So if you have 10 tons of above ground biomass, that's roughly 10 tons of root exudates. Now, there's two ways we can increase the amount of root exudates in our soil so that we can stimulate biology. The first one is increasing the photosynthetic ability of the plant, and the other one is increasing the amounts of time that the plant has to photosynthesize. And so when we're looking at the photosynthetic ability of the plant. We need to be measuring the bricks of the plant. In order to increase our bricks, we need pretty much a few key minerals. We need magnesium, we need manganese, we need iron, we need copper, and then also phosphorus is also quite important. So there's 5 minerals. We also need nitrogen as well. In addition to all of that, we want to make sure that our plants don't have excess amounts of ammonium and nitrate, as that's a very energy intensive process for the plant to convert that nitrate and ammonium into amino acids. So the ideal case is we have the plant has sufficient amounts of all these minerals and we haven't been giving it way too much ammonium, just enough that it can handle it. That's going to elevate the photosynthetic ability of the plant. Also, we need sunlight and water. That makes sense. We can't control it too much unless we're irrigating. So that's why we tend to focus on the nutrition side. We can do that with foliar applications to get a rapid increase. The other thing we can consider is not so much a nutritional application, but more the cultural changes. I'm thinking about having multiple species of plants, as this will increase the amount of photosynthesis that's occurring on a per meter base. And so if we have a cool season plant and a warm season plant, they're going to increase the overall photosynthetic ability of that area. So it might not be, say, the actual plant itself, but more so that area. A combination of both is great. If you can do a foliar application with those minerals, as well as a multi-species, either cash crop or cover crop, the best way to increase the photosynthetic ability of that square meter. The other thing is making sure we have a living root there all year round. And so if we have, say, a highly effective plant that's photosynthesizing out and has, say, bricks of 12, but that's only there for 3 months, we might as well have a plant with a bricks of 3 for 4 months. And so thinking in terms of the photosynthetic ability per unit of time and then across time are the two main drivers. Anyways, so we want to maximize the amount of photosynthesis so that the plant can release root exudates to the microbes to then scavenge these minerals and then feed it back to the plant. So until that point where the microbes can supply our plants with nutrition, we need to make up that gap. So we need to supply that system with those inputs, otherwise we're going to be missing out on yield. Now, if you don't really care about yields, that's a different conversation. But for commercial growers, it's super important that we maximize our yield, as this is largely the biggest driving factor for profit. And so not necessarily to the point where we're having a negative marginal rate of return. But if we can maximize the amount we can produce with the least amount of inputs, that's really where we can drive a lot of profit. So with that in mind, and thinking about supplying our crop with those requirements that the soil and our soil biology can't supply itself, we need to think, how much do we apply, what do we apply, and when? Typically, we're looking at nitrogen and phosphorus, which is typically what we apply, but also all of our trace minerals as well. So what I like to do is we take our yield target, we determine the crop removal rate, estimate how much our soil can supply to that crop, and then we make up the difference. Now, when we're making up the difference, there's a lot of different ways we can lose our nutrients. Phosphorus, I'm not too worried about because that's not really lost too much. It's more fixed into the soil. So we're looking at, for phosphorus, how do we prevent the fixation of phosphorus onto the soil? For nitrogen, it's more so, how do we prevent it from being lost, either leached away or volatilized off? The best way is to add a carbon source to that input. And so a humic substance, even molasses or something like that, a bit of carbon to hold that either nitrogen or phosphorus and prevent it from either being locked up or lost. Now, as a general rule of thumb, most agronomists will go, okay, if we need to apply 50 kilos of nitrogen, we'll double that because we're expecting 50% losses. And so if you need to apply 50, we're going to apply 100 instead. That means there's a 50% potential decrease in terms of if we had 100% uptake in our nitrogen, we could get a 50% reduction in the amount of nitrogen we apply. Now, even if we do add humic substances to our urea or something like that, doesn't necessarily mean we're going to completely cut out our losses, but we are going to be able to reduce our losses so that we can then reinvest that money elsewhere. So that's a big strategy that we're implementing, which is adding humic substances onto our fertilizer, and then that will allow us to reduce our rates a little bit. In terms of phosphorus, it depends on the totals as well. Whether or not we need to make a capital phos allocation or not, just really depends on your soil geology. Now, that's in terms of looking forward, because we need to make, say, a start of fertilizer application without knowing the status of the crop. What we'd like to do in season is a differential sap test analysis. What this will tell us is the nutrient status of the plant at that point in time. So it'll tell us, is that plant translocating nutrients from the older leaves to the younger leaves, or are particular nutrients getting stuck in the older leaves and not getting into the younger leaves? we can use that to determine whether or not we're going to make a foliar application with different type of minerals. So for example, typically for say iron, if there's a more than 10% variation between the younger leaves and older leaves, where there's less in the younger leaves, that could suggest that there's a deficiency there, which means we could make an iron application and increase the Brix level that way. What's super useful is the total nitrogen component of this. This tells us the nitrogen status of the crop, and it's a very accurate way of knowing this. And so even though I don't tend to cut too aggressively in the first year working with a client, it's good to monitor that total nitrogen status so that potentially the next year we can make an informed decision about our previous program to say, hey, do we have enough nitrogen or do we have too much? Was it a luxury amount? Could we cut potentially in the following season? Likewise with phosphorus. So that means at the end of the season, if both of our nitrogen and phosphorus has been high and sufficient in our SAP analysis, then we can have that conversation about, okay, let's cut these rates further. So all our other minerals, especially our trace minerals, can be applied with a foliar application. It's a really good way to just kickstart that system, because sometimes different minerals can antagonize the uptake of other minerals, and so it can be quite important to foliar apply those minerals because we can get an economic yield response from that. So that's largely it from the nutrition side. It's largely looking at, do we have enough total of the nutrients in the total component? Is it available? Do we have a microbial problem? And then finally, supplying to the plant if we don't have the microbes or the total component. That should be fine within season. The big thing with regenerative agriculture is that we don't really want to be applying as many nutrients, and we want to have our system itself supply the inputs to our crop. And so that's things like cover crops, pasture phases, and livestock integration, and reducing our tillage, so that we can continue to build up our system so that the microbes can supply our plants with that nutrition needed. Largely, a lot of these problems can be solved by increasing soil organic matter. So when we increase the soil organic matter, we increase the fertility of our soil effectively. We increase the cation exchange capacity, we also increase the anion exchange capacity, increase microbial activity, we increase water holding capacity. All of these things happen downstream of increasing the soil organic matter. The way to increase that is with root exudates, as we talked about before. The other component of, say, soil health is alleviating soil limitations. So the big things on these are soil acidity, which can lock up different minerals as well as reduce microbial activity, compaction, which prevents roots from getting through that compacted zone, as well as acidity and salinity. All of these things, there's cultural practices like changing the species of our crops that we plant, or we can make applications to alleviate these. So for example, pH. pH can be largely overcome with a liming application. If it's below a pH of 5.5, then it's economic to make a liming application. Compaction, I think in the right situations where you do have a compacted zone and then it's uncompacted underneath, going in with a deep ripper, getting rid of that compaction zone, put a cover crop in afterwards, and then aim to reduce the amount of potential compaction afterwards. So removing our soil limitations will allow us to grow more crops and ideally increase the photosynthetic ability of the plant. When we do that, it feeds the biology to then take the minerals from the total component and then feed it back to the plant to then further improve our soil health. So that's largely it. They are the big concepts in terms of what we talked about in the 8 hours plus of content that I put together. If you're interested to learn more about all the different nutrients and how we manage them specifically, you can go watch each of the individual nutrients. They each have a video dedicated to themselves, and you can find that on our YouTube channel. And if any of this is interesting and you'd like to implement it on your own farm, you can reach out. We can do a free consult, talk you through some of the ways you can get started in Regen. Thanks for watching. My name's Teal. Cheers.